About a month after the very first Witcher game released back in 2007, a spin-off came out on Java phones, and I'm as surprised as you are. The Witcher as a franchise has since garnered such a quality reputation that you just wouldn't expect something like this to exist, and considering The Witcher's now massive fan base, it's interesting that this mobile game, subtitled Crimson Trail, has remained so obscure. But on further inspection, it's actually not too outlandish that this exists when you consider the context. If there's anything that I've learnt covering these old mobile games, it's that back in those days, pretty much every big AAA release got a J2ME mobile port because they're so cheap to make, they're so easy to sell, and they functioned as a form of marketing for the game they're based on. And when stuff like Far Cry 2 or Bioshock or Mafia 2 can get a pixely phone game, then so can The Witcher, and here we are. It's a side-scroller in the same vein as something you'd see on a 16-bit platform, complete with decent pixely sprites on some equally good-looking parallax-scrolling backdrops. Despite a low frame rate, visually this is above average on the platform, particularly thanks to its impressive character animations. Like, Geralt can swing his sword in a multitude of different ways, which I know doesn't sound like much, but given the platform's extreme memory limitations, it is unusual to see. Now, I'm guessing a handful of you had internal alarms go off when I mentioned that this is a side-scroller, because of the platform's limitation to one input at a time. Fast-paced action games can't really help but feel janky, and often concessions have to be made, like here the up button always jumps you forward because you can't simply hold forward and hit jump at the same time. You really need to reprogram your brain a bit to always let go of one button before pressing the next so that it actually registers your jumps and your attacks and your turns when you want it to, and I think that the problem is amplified tenfold by the lower frame rate. God of War Betrayal had the same unavoidable issue, but it ran a lot smoother, so the effect wasn't as bad. Regardless, you do mostly get used to it, and it ends up being the least of this game's problems. Now, I know that you've read the title of this video, I know that I'm not pulling out the rug from anyone's feet. This game really is just awful. Like, if you were studying game design or 2D platformers and wanted a 101 on what not to do, The Witcher Crimson Trail is your game. There's just so many problems here that I don't even know where to start. So just picking something, the vertical perspective and the way the levels are designed means there's an absurd amount of blindly jumping into the void and hoping that you land on something, because if you don't, then you'll fall into an endless death pit and need to restart the level. Even if you do land somewhere, you'll often land on an enemy that you couldn't see, and you'll unavoidably lose health. Which wouldn't be as bad as it is if the levels weren't absurdly large, long, and confusing. There's no visual variance within each level, instead they just reuse the same assets everywhere, and they don't just expect you to simply go from left to right. Instead, it's a lot of verticality, a lot of dead ends, and no logic to how it funnels you through. So expect to just run around hitting walls and hoping not to randomly die until the level uneventfully ends. I really can't stress enough how frustrating and confusing it is making your way through these stages, and I lost count of how many times that I almost quit playing and almost quit making this video. While running around, you'll want to avoid enemies the best you can because engaging with them is too risky, and simply jumping over them is often the best way to save on health. Not only that, but there's just so many enemies in every single level that if you did try to fight each one, I could imagine a level taking an extremely long time to complete. I'm talking like 30 minutes or more when they can be done in under 5. There's no reward like XP or health for killing enemies, so it's just a complete waste of time. Geralt's two swords return, but instead of using the silver sword for supernatural beings and the steel sword for non-supernatural beings, it's just complete trial and error here. Some humanoid enemies take more damage from the silver sword, and some monstery looking things take more damage from the steel sword, and Lord knows why. To add salt to the wound, the game's simple text help screen never differentiates between the swords, simply saying that one sword is better against certain monsters than the other, which is nice and vague. It's sort of like the team behind this never got the memo of how the swords work, leaving you in a constant state of uncertainty and confusion and frustration. It's a shame there's so many reasons to avoid the combat, because it's actually where the game does something marginally mechanically interesting. After pressing the attack button, arrows appear at the bottom of the screen, and if you press one of these arrows, you follow up with a combo attack and more arrows appear. As the game goes on, the longer you can combo, and it's genuinely a pretty smart way of making the combat more interesting given the limited controls, and adapting the first Witcher game's rhythmic combat. Not to mention it shows off the cool animations, and it just kind of feels pretty good to use. Again though, there's no reason reason to use it aside from the occasions where you have to, but credit where credit's due. The Witcher medallion also makes an appearance as it dangles below your health and mana bars, and it vibrates whenever you're near enemies just like it should. And if I was playing this on a real phone instead of an emulator, the phone itself would vibrate, which is very minorly interesting. There isn't much you can really do knowing that an enemy is near, so it just serves as more Witcher flavoring. And of course, the mana bar can be spent on your 4 signs: fire, freeze, push, and shield, just like the main game, but with one missing. Though you can upgrade them at the end of each level, they're still too underpowered to be useful, and cycling through them is more effort than it's worth. Then again, combat itself is more effort than it's worth. There's a lot more for me to harp on about, like the infuriating falling platforms, or the infuriating enemy knockbacks, or the herbs that you can find in each level to permanently buff your health, mana, or speed, which, by the way, is about as simple of a system as you can imagine, but I think that you get the point. The Witcher Crimson Trail is just not good, but I guess the next question is it worth playing if you're an absolute Witcher fanatic? Well, just to frame it for you, it's a very, very simple plot where a young Geralt, after finishing his training, hears rumors of a local monster terrorizing everyone, so he makes his way across this map, assumedly across the titular Crimson Trail, until he eventually ends up fighting this big 2-headed snake with a disappointing QuickTime event. Fun fact, this hasn't been denounced as not being lore, and it was contracted out by CD Projekt, so I guess technically in the video game canon, this did happen. It's chronologically the earliest game in the series, and it's Geralt's first mission. Remember, the big thing at the time about The Witcher was how there were consequences to your actions and a lot of moral grey area decisions. Well, they've also attempted to translate that aspect here with 3 different points where you can have conversations with enemies. Early on, a guy is bitten by a werewolf and you can choose to give him healing herbs, leave him, or kill him. I chose the herbs because I'm just such a great guy and moved on with the mindless frustration. A while later, you defeat a guy under an evil curse who on his last leg says he's not sure if the curse has been lifted, and you're given the chance to either spare him or kill him. At this point, I was taking no chances at letting the game get any longer, so I killed him. And then finally, you can choose to spare or kill the final boss, the woman who placed curses on everyone. I'm not sure why you'd spare her, and again, I'm taking no chances, so down she went. The result of all this decision making was a final text screen which said tales spread throughout the land of a maddened evil white-haired swordsman murdering and devastating entire villages, which, after lifting an evil curse and saving everyone, seems a little unfair, but at this point I was just glad this disaster of a game was over. So given the platform, this does have some okay Witcher flavouring with the medallion and the magic and the decision making and the just general attempts at making it a Witcher game, but really, to answer if this is worth playing for die-hard Witcher fans, I'd still say no. The plot is oversimple, lacking in character, and charmless, and again, the game as a whole is just really, really bad. I think something slower like an RPG would have absolutely worked better, both because of the input problems and because it'd take better advantage of the IP. If you're so curious and this video isn't enough for you, I've uploaded the full unedited playthrough on my second channel that you can click through, or sit through for about an hour and a half, but if you're willing to do that, then maybe you should just play it. I think what The Witcher Crimson Trail represents is a very typical J2ME game. It banks on a license and it has good visuals to sell you in the screenshot, so it looks like a good game on the surface, or more importantly on the store you're browsing phone games on, but once the sale's been made, the game turns out to be shallow nonsense. And I don't like covering shallow nonsense. I like to think that my style on this channel is uncovering games that look like they should be worse or more uninteresting than they are, so I spent a lot of time debating with myself as to whether or not I should even cover this, but before playing it, I always wondered what it was, so I hope that those of you who have also had this curiosity are satisfied by this video, and I hope it serves as a sort of public service announcement to not play this for yourself. There's a reason you haven't yet played The Witcher Crimson Trail, if you've even heard of it. And with that, we wrap up the review of The Witcher Crimson Trail. It's been a while since I've done a Java phone review, and I really enjoy making them, but like, they get less views than my normal videos, but they also take less effort to make, so it's sort of a bit of a balance for me. I think I'll just keep throwing them in here and there for the interesting ones, and I'd like to delve into the J2ME games that are actually worth playing. Because at the moment, I wouldn't... None of the games I've really covered are particularly worth playing. Even the good ones, you can kind of just tell what they are from the video, you know? They're not really like an enlightening experience in even a marginal way. So I'd like to cover games that maybe aren't licensed, but are just interesting. I know there's a few horror games people speak wonders about, like games with good writing or just interesting mechanics or just an interesting use of the platform. So if you guys have any suggestions on games like that, it's quite a hard... It's a very undiscussed platform, so I'd like to turn this comment section into a bit of a recommend me interesting games that you played that are genuinely interesting, because I'd like to cover them. So yeah, regardless, if you'd like to support, the easiest way you can is actually by clicking like or subscribing or clicking the bell or commenting, all that stuff, because it helps the algorithm boost my videos, you all know that. But you can also support through Patreon, and I'd like to thank all my patrons, including all the ones coming up on the screen right now, but not limited to them, and especially including Adam Beals, Analog Man, Anthony Heisel, Blake Barnett, Boggy Online, Caden the Dingo, Chef, Chris Bushkas, Devin Grandal, Dominic Chikoki, Evil Chicken, Gary Pay, Hero, Labcat, Lucas Ray Sevic, Maximilian Kunzman, May Aris, Mazaki, Melanie G, Minimme writes fanfictions about Peter Molyneux, Mustache Duct Tape, Mrs. Minimme, Nathan Archer, Peaceful Kumquat,
Plague,
Ritalin for Kids, Tia, Test Drive Unlimited 2, The Mighty Mega Link, Thomas Damsgaard, Trapalaw Ross, Travis, Trevor Corbin, Trixie Emerson, Under 10 Hours, Who Walks with Fergus, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Thank you all so much for supporting financially and generally, and if you've got this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Take it easy.